Hi, folks. Welcome. Welcome. If you're just joining us, please introduce yourself in the chat box. Let us know your name, your organization, and where you're tuning in from. And thank you so much for being here. I know it is Friday. It is the end of a crazy, hectic week. You all deserve a long, restful weekend. So hopefully the next 45 minutes here can streamline some things for you, get you some answers. Some quick housekeeping items. This recording will be made available shortly after the event, so if you miss anything, you'll be able to look back on it. We do have a Q&A box. We will likely not have time for an actual Q&A in the event, so please submit your questions. We'll do our best to put together a LinkedIn post afterwards answering those for you. And on our agenda today, we're going to recap some of the main updates that have been made this week regarding federal funding. We'll share next steps and considerations for grant seekers, and I'm going to wrap up with a little information about how Instrumentl can be a resource for you in this time, both for our current users as well as any of you who aren't using Instrumentl. And we're joined today by two federal funding experts because I really want you all to hear this from folks who know what's going on the best. So Rachel Werner and Patrice Davis are here with us today. We're going to dive right into the discussion with Rachel here in a second. Rachel is the owner and CEO of RBW Strategy, a grants consulting firm located in the DC metro area, and she is also a principal at MyFedTrainer, offering compliance training to folks about the complexities of federal grant awards. Rachel and her team have raised over $240 million and managed over $2.5 billion in federal grant awards. And Rachel has been an invaluable resource to our team as we try to report out to all of you on what's going on. So thank you so much, Rachel, for hopping in here with us on such short notice. I want to dive right into our questions, and we're not going to have any slides for this part. We're just going to go Q&A style. So, for starters, Rachel, can you walk us through briefly what has happened over the last 48 to 72 hours and how we got to this point?
I mean, it's hard to believe it's only been a few days because I feel like we have all lived a life in the past week as grant professionals. I mean, we are always so used to deadlines and quick turnarounds. So I just want to honor that and just say, we hear you. There's been a lot going on. Okay, so I'm just going to just dive into a little bit about where we got to because I think we have to start with the executive orders. So the executive orders, as I'm sure you saw with great flourish, that President Trump signed a whole slew of them on January 20th when he was inaugurated. So these covered various different things. I want to get the wording right because I'm sure you've heard them many times. Protecting the American people against invasion, reevaluating and realigning United States foreign aid, unleashing American energy, ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing, defending women from gender ideology extremism, restoring biological truth to the federal government. Just want to make sure I got some of those because they're important. So the reason I say this is that those are the priorities. Those are signed off by the Trump administration. So they're really targeting those specific those specific populations when we start getting to the federal funding freeze. So then cut to Monday night, we saw OMB memo 2513, which will be ingrained in our minds probably forever. And so what was that? It's basically saying, yep, we're going to have a federal funding freeze of all of the funding, and that is grants, that is loans, all different kinds of disbursements to different, individuals, organizations. Obviously, that created mass panic, confusion, because we know how important grant funding is. We know how important loans are. We're talking about, not just organizations, but also individuals, people who are receiving Medicaid and all of these types of things. So then they said, okay, yeah, that was a lot because also there was a federal judge in DC who put a temporary freeze, which is still frozen until Monday. Okay, so that's so then they rescinded the memo. Well, actually, no, backtrack. They updated 2513 and provide a little bit more clarification on the programs that were impacted. Then they rescinded the memo shortly thereafter because of, all of the pushback. So where we are is that, yes, they still have a priority to focus on those programs and initiatives that don't align with their priorities. So, in a follow up message, everyone said, yes, the funding freeze is over, but that's not true because the executive orders are still being implemented. So, they're just focusing on a better way to root out those initiatives, programs, and things. So, expect another memo. We're just not there yet. So that's just a quick overview. I think I covered it.
Yeah, it's quite the overview. There's some
Yeah.
back and forth there, right? So, given all of that,
Mhm.
is the freeze officially lifted? I know there's a lot of confusion around, is this for real? Is it actually lifted? What does it mean in practical terms?
Okay, so for the most part, people still can get their funding. However, there are some opportunities that have been completely halted, especially those related to green energy. And that was another thing. Like, we're gonna stop enacting the IIJA IRA funding, which spends a lot of the money that's dispersed go towards green initiatives, which, as I said, is an executive order that they want to diminish. Also, DEIA. So there are some programs that are already unable to access their funds. They are the funding opportunities announcements are completely they've been rescinded, but there's still the questionable areas are still like, well, I receive funding and I support immigrants. So can I still, for now, yes, because there hasn't been a review. What we're waiting on is when they review the federal programs. That's going to come in another memo. It just hasn't happened yet. So we will see when that drops, but there's still an intention to do that review. So the federal freeze is, it impacts some, but not all. And that's as much clarification as I can give at this point, because I've heard of, well, I can't get into the portal. I can't. Yes, that's true. So, yeah.
All right, so there's not going to be a very clear picture painted for us at the moment, but high level for current federal funding grantees or applicants, what are
Mhm.
some immediate next steps that they should be taking right now?
Well, I think if you are an award recipient, draw down as much funding as you possibly can, because we don't know how things are going to shift. And I think it's important to make sure that you have as much funding as you can in your account versus what is in the payment management system. So make sure all of that. I would also look at your agreements with your subrecipients, with your contractor, to see what obligations that you have. Ensure what exactly they're supposed to do. If you have to issue a stop work order at one time, how's that going to impact the relationship? How's it going to impact the continuation of work? I would also check on your notices of grant award just to see what the termination clauses are, because there's some verbiage that can be a little bit there's some ambiguity in some of it, especially with the new OMB guidance that was issued. If you've received an award after that time, there's a little bit more fluidity, so there it might not hold up in a legal sense as much it was before that time. So I would just be very intentional looking at that, looking at the terms and conditions and seeing, what you're on the hook for, and also, just seeing how much in terms of obligations that you have for your various different awards and how you can spend down.
And this is maybe a niche case for some, but what about reimbursement grants? What do you have any guidance around that? Because I know some folks are scared that, maybe the money won't be reimbursed. So do we have any guidance we can give at this stage?
Oh, it's really tough because, the two ways that, for those who might be unaware, that you can receive funding is cash advancement, which is like, yes, and then you have reimbursement. So I think that with reimbursement, it's just based on it's in the notice of grant award. So if you have reimbursement method, you can't change that until you get approval from the agency. So if you have a reimbursement type grant, I would just do my best to kind of work with your pass-through entity or your agency to see how much you can get reimbursed, because you are allowed to get some funding if there is a need. So if you can kind of front load some of the work that you need to do under that grant award, maybe there's a way that you can get a bigger reimbursement. So I think there just has to be some kind of justification for that. You can't just ask for it if you're not going to be able to, you know, use the funds. So that would be my only suggestion there, because I know it's tough. And I know that some payment management systems have been locked. So people have to keep going and going and going. And I would like to give a shout out to the National Council of Nonprofits. So if you are still receiving those kind of lockouts, if you're still having financial impacts, they have a form on their website that you can go in and report that. They are looking for all the nonprofits to share that information. So please, please do that. I strongly encourage you to do that.
Yeah, huge shout out to the National Council for Nonprofits. They have been so critical in advocating for nonprofits over the last, I mean, always, but over the last week, really, they've played such a vital role for all of the time that's been bought for nonprofits while we try to figure out what's going on. So another question here, are we expecting differences between how federal agencies are going to implement and interpret the new OMB guidance? Are there going to be inconsistencies and confusion there, agency to agency?
No, I mean, so 2 CFR, so the last update to 2 CFR 200 in October, that one of the things they want to do is streamline and build more consistency in how the information was going to be interpreted across agencies. So what they have done is that a lot of agencies have, I'd say, you know, almost all of them have adopted 2 CFR 200. So there's not going to be that conflict. One of the biggest ones, the biggest grant maker, HHS, actually formally announced, like, yep, we're going to apply 2 CFR 200. So I don't see issues there. There's some programs that are a little bit more niche, but those are more the exception, not the rule.
Got it. Thank you so much, Rachel. I know we're at the top of the time that we have you booked for, so I want to say huge thank you to Rachel for your time. This was a really concise and helpful overview of how we got to where we are, some key next steps. Folks, I'm going to put Rachel's LinkedIn in the chat. I highly encourage you to follow her on LinkedIn. Like I said, Rachel has been so crucial with timely updates about everything that's going on. And there is also a FedTrainer newsletter that you can subscribe to if you want to get more updates from Rachel. Thank you again, Rachel. We really appreciate your expertise and your guidance. And thank you for taking the time to be here and walk through this with us. I know this has been a crazy week for you, and this is not the only place that you're coming on to share some guidance. So we really appreciate you.
Yeah, you're welcome, and hang in there, everybody. We're going to get through this, okay? All right. Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks, Rachel.
All
I
right.
want to turn now to our next expert, Patrice Davis, who is in the room with us now. Hi, Patrice.
Hi there, Nia. How are
Patrice,
you?
good. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, as good as we can be, right? Patrice is the
Yeah,
founder
absolutely.
of Patrice is the founder of GrantsWorks and GrantsWorks Academy. She has successfully managed primary and sub awards from over 20 local, state, and federal agencies and sub agencies. And she also served as the fiscal consultant during site monitoring visits of state agency recipients of federal grants. And Patrice is another super knowledgeable expert in this space. And I'm so grateful for your time, Patrice, for being here to answer some questions for us. And I want to dive right in. I know we have you for limited time as well. So, first
Mhm,
question, the freeze is lifted, but we do know that
mhm.
some key funding areas are going to be impacted in the long term. Rachel touched on this a little bit, but can you break down in a little bit more detail what some of those sectors are that are likely to see the biggest changes?
Yeah, so let's talk about any grants specifically from the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law. So any grants that are funding green energy, green manufacturing, environmental remediation, anything around the transition to a green economy, that's more than likely going to be impacted. Any grant from an agency and from any agency, actually. So I do want to make sure we're clear about that. So the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law were primarily funds awarded to the Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, EPA in some instances, and several other agencies. But the others that I can think of course, are any grant from any agency that included DEI metrics or initiatives, any grant from any agency that required a community benefits plan, primarily U.S. Department of Energy, any grant from any agency that required NEPA compliance. And so they won't, really what they're going to be doing there is trying to relax NEPA requirements. NEPA stands for the National Environmental Policy Act. And that's basically the law that says that any federal funding that'll be used for a construction or other or similar project needs to have some kind of environmental review conducted. And so just wanted to give you guys some background on that, just in case it wasn't discussed earlier. I would say grants that reflect, any grant really that reflects Biden's Executive Order 14008, which is the Climate Crisis Executive Order that brought about the following: the Justice 40 initiative, a lot of EJ metrics, EJ scorecard, anything having to do with that will more than likely be impacted. So I know I'm not giving you sectors, so to speak, but I do think these other details are going to be really important. And so I would also pay close attention to any grants in general from the EPA, Department of Energy, of course, and of course, U.S. Department of Education, just because that's something that we heard even before the administration, came into office, that they were really interested in really taking a look at U.S. Department of Education. And I do also want to point out something that we're not sure much was discussed earlier, was that the president's executive order, one of their executive orders actually may also target for-profit and, of course, nonprofit organizations, especially large endowments and foundations, they say, with assets of over 500 million, specifically those that are tied to DEI. So a lot of the DEI targets aren't necessarily just those, that are implemented by federal agencies or recipients of federal financial assistance.
Thank you so much, Patrice. That was a very helpful breakdown, because there are just so many different pieces spread across all of these memos. And there was a comment earlier in the chat box that confusion is the key here, and I think they're really delivering on that.
Absolutely.
So given all of those sectors and all of those areas of work that you just talked about, for nonprofits that are operating in those impacted areas or depend on grants from those impacted agencies, what do they do now?
So one of the first things, and I actually sat and thought about this because we've had to advise our clients about this. So let me go ahead and share some of the things that we've advised our clients. So one of the things that I'm sure that Rachel covered is the fact that many agencies have already, of course, restricted external communication. And so, our grantees, our clients are not actually getting any feedback from federal agencies. So here are some of the things that we've advised. Of course, first, notify all stakeholders of the pause. So if you are a pass-through entity, definitely notify your subrecipients. If you are a subawardee, definitely want to find out what your pass-through entity's plans are. And of course, any grant-funded contractors. I would, they have, we've advised that they pause all work so that they're not, in those instances where it's possible, so that they're not continuing to incur additional personnel and non-personnel costs. Definitely email their federal point of contact. You definitely want to have something in writing that you reached out to them saying, hey, this is what we plan on doing until we receive further guidance, because there is still, of course, a legal agreement between the grantee and the federal government. And so just to make sure that the federal government understands what your plans are, you want to kind of make sure that there's something in writing to them saying that you've decided to pause again until you receive further guidance. In those instances when they can actually conduct drawdowns, and several of our clients have not necessarily been able to do that, definitely want to conduct any drawdowns. What does that mean for those of you who aren't sure is to basically request reimbursements from the federal government for costs incurred before January 20th, and assuming again that the payment portal works. And for our grant writing clients, because we serve both pre-award and post-award, provide services on both the pre-award and the post-award side. Those that are interested in NOFOs, notices of funding opportunity, that are not necessarily affected by the list that I shared earlier, they are still interested, and we're supporting them as they prepare applications for upcoming deadlines, because we just don't know what's going to happen. So everyone's, we're just in that regard, continuing to prepare applications. And these are both new and renewal applications. So that's why it's so important. And then one of the things I recommend, and I know I've done this, it sounds simple, but I've created an Office of Management and Budget Google alert. I want to know everything that's coming out of there because I want to make sure that we're as prepared as possible. So hope that helps.
Yeah, that definitely does help. I have a question that sort of follows what you just talked about. If an organization has projects that are not working around any of those impacted areas, none of the targeted initiatives, are they safe? Can they tell their project officers to get back to work and our funding is good? Or are there risks as well if you're not in one of those impacted areas?
That's a great question. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily safe. I would continue to do the work if they're not in one of those impacted areas. I do want to point out something that I learned earlier today, that the Justice 40 initiative itself, right? And I actually have a link that I'm going to try to pull up for everyone and share with you so that you can hopefully share it out with everyone who's in attendance and even those who registered. The Justice 40 initiative itself was interwoven into 518 programs across 19 agencies. So that is why they wanted, that could have contributed to why they wanted to pause and really do a deep dive into every single funding opportunity, into every single existing grant, because it's so interwoven across the federal government. But yes, if you do have a program or project that is not affected by any of the ones that I described earlier, any that Rachel may have shared earlier, definitely continue to do the work, continue to continue to do the work, but then also again notify the federal official. It's one of those things where you don't want to again incur costs that may not be reimbursed. One of the things that I'm not sure Rachel talked about earlier was the fact that because federal workers were also given this opportunity to basically resign, we don't know what the grant management staff is going to look like, or even the project officer staff is going to look like in the coming weeks and days. We don't know if project officers for their particular grant decided to leave. And so that's why this is all, it really is chaos and confusion.
Yeah,
You just don't know
absolutely.
who's going to be still. Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't have enough transparency from the agencies to know what's going on in there. And we can, I think, safely assume that there's a lot of chaos and internal turmoil there as well. We have a question in the chat that I think is a quick one for you to answer because you already touched on this briefly, but for organizations that were just about to pursue federal funding and they feel like perhaps what they're pursuing it for is not one of the impacted areas, is that something they should go ahead with, or should we hold off on looking into federal funding at this point in time?
Absolutely, they should continue. I definitely think they should. As a matter of fact, again, we have some clients, one particular client that we're going to be meeting with today who's interestingly, an NIH grant, but it's an NIH grant that's not impacted by some of the areas that this current administration is interested in kind of scaling back. I do want to add, and I think this is really, really important. I'm glad you asked the question, Nia, about what they should do, whether or not they should proceed with working. One of the first things that they need to do, and this is something that we always advise our clients to do, is make sure you go through your notice of award to find out what are the executive orders, what are the laws, what are the regulations that apply to this grant, and are any of these executive orders, agency requirements, laws, or regulations tied to some of those areas that we know that this administration is targeting. That's one of the ways that you can definitely tell whether or not your grant is at risk. So I'm glad you asked the question, and I'm glad I had an opportunity to circle back and really understand and make sure I made that clear for everyone in attendance.
Yeah, and thank you for pointing that out. There are so many questions that we could be asking and so many answers that we're all looking for. I think the next thing I want to ask is, are there additional changes that we're anticipating or key dates that we should be on the lookout for to know what's going to happen next?
Yes. So the first thing, and I haven't checked the news yet to see if this has happened, is we want to definitely check to see if Russell, I think his name is Russell Vout or Vogt, I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name, Vought, will be confirmed as the new director of the Office of Management and Budget. He is one of the key architects of this approach. And so we want to make sure, I mean, it's very likely that his confirmation will pass. It passed, I believe, a committee last night, and so we want to just kind of pay attention to that. The other date that I would pay attention to is, of course, February 10th. While February 10th was the date in the infamous memo that agency heads needed to report back to OMB to say, hey, here are the programs, projects, and initiatives that we will, want, that they're basically targeting. I'm curious to know what's going to happen, on February 10th or after February 10th, because internally that's more than likely the date that they're still working to the initial deadline they're trying to meet. We talked, I think I heard a little bit of talk about uniform guidance, and I actually, as I was driving in, I was thinking about uniform guidance. For those of you who are already aware that, of course, the most recent changes to uniform guidance were announced in April of last year, and then many of them became effective October 1st. October 1st was the official effective date, but agencies were given the option to, make it effective before then if they wanted to. Now, we do have to remember that one of the reasons that uniform guidance was updated was to integrate the previous administration's priorities. So I do expect that there will be some changes to uniform guidance. I don't know how radical they'll be. I don't know how surgical they'll be, but I just want to make sure that, I do want to share that I do believe that. As a matter of fact, I think Justice 40 is actually mentioned in uniform guidance. These are the things that I'll be looking for from OMB. These are just some of the things I'll be looking for others as well. An announcement from OMB about which grants they plan on terminating. Which grantees with affected grants can get paid for eligible and budgeted expenses. I really want to pay close attention to that for obvious reasons. What decisions they're making about continuation funding for some of those programs that were authorized by, again, Inflation Reduction Act, bipartisan infrastructure law, DEI, initiatives, things like that. Any clarity around existing notices of funding opportunity and related deadlines. Our deadlines are going to be pushed back because of this, of the mass confusion that's happened. Our deadlines, we just need some clarity, and it needs to be, unfortunately, NOFO specific, like specific to the funding opportunity. And decisions about any proposed modifications to uniform guidance. Those are the things that I'll be paying really close attention to.
Thank you for that. Like I said, there's so many moving pieces, and it's hard to know, what are we looking out for? What's actually a signal for what's going to come next? So I think that's a helpful overview. One final question. I know we're at time for you, so feel free to make this a super brief answer if you have to drop. But what are some proactive steps that you recommend grant seekers take to future-proof their funding, whether it's federal or any other sort of funding?
Yeah, and so two quick ones that I'd like to share is obviously assess the dependability and the sustainability of all current funding sources, grant, non-grant, individual donations, business, all of those things I think should be paid very close attention to, because the announcement of the pause really sent a shock, throughout the economy. It wasn't just to those who are receiving federal financial assistance, because, anything that this substantial obviously causes a sense of instability. And so, I'm sure that this is going to be felt across the economy. And I would also find out which grants they currently receive that will be impacted. And again, that starts with doing that deep analysis of your notice of award and your grant agreement. That's one of the first things we do when our clients hire us, is we basically prepare a compliance snapshot so that we know going in how we can advise them and, help them make some of the procedural and process-based changes that they need to make. Those are the two that I'll share for now.
Thank you so much, Patrice. Thank you for the clarity and the direction you've provided for us. Like I've said many times, there's just so many things to keep track of, and your intel here is invaluable. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate your time, folks. I'm also going to share Patrice's LinkedIn, another great resource for you to stay in the know, right here in the chat box. Patrice, if there's any links that you wanted to shout out, feel free to paste them in the chat. Otherwise, I can get it sent out to all of our registrants afterwards. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye to Patrice. Thank you so much again. And I'm going to turn to some resources that you can tap into from Instrumentl.
Great, thank you guys. Bye. I'm gonna stay and watch some of the chats, but I'll be in the background.
Thanks, Patrice.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, our priority is always your mission and supporting you all as you make incredible and vital things happen day in and day out, despite the hurdles and challenges like these, what's happening right now. Grants are tough. The grant landscape is tough, but you are tougher. So the first thing I want to highlight is how we're navigating all the changes in our grant database. So we have over 22,000 active grant opportunities on Instrumentl. 2,000 and some of those are federal grants, and many of these are going through significant changes right now. And before I tell you how we're keeping up, I want to show you who's behind that work. I want to give a big shout out to our entire grants team. We have a very talented team of professionals working every day to make sure our database has every grant you could ever want and that each of these are up to date. Bonnie, who oversees our database, and Karen, who oversees federal grants in specific. They deserve a very special shout out here for everything they're doing every day, but especially right now to make sure you're getting accurate and timely information. So, first and foremost, yes, Alan, these are our rock stars. Definitely, they are the backbone of Instrumentl. So, shout out to them. First and foremost, we are getting notifications about changes directly from grants.gov. Once we get an alert, we're updating that opportunity in our database to reflect whatever new terms have been added. So when you're going through federal grants on Instrumentl, each opportunity should reflect the latest information we have from the grant-making agency. If there are no notes or updates, that means no information has been shared from their side. And the information we're getting varies from department to department. For example, you can look right there what some of those notices we're getting are. A grant can remain open with changes, so you can still apply. There's still a deadline, but the NOFO has changed. Maybe they've removed certain language around DEI, and they've added a message stating the opportunity is in compliance with the OMB memo. Or the eligibility requirements have changed. We're seeing both of these happen right now. Some deadlines are being extended, or on the flip side, some are being closed early. Both these things can happen for their own reasons. So whether it's tied to the OMB memo is unclear unless they give a specific message for their reasoning, which doesn't always happen. And then some opportunities are just being canceled. So Department of the Interior, USAID, these two agencies, we're seeing a lot of cancellations. Again, it's going to vary agency to agency. Once we have an update, it's being reflected in our system. We are triggering emails to users who are affected by this. So whether the grant is no longer active, the NOFO has been updated, a deadline has changed, you will hear about it if you are tracking that grant. And one more note from Karen, our federal grants lead. She points out something really important to consider, and Rachel also touched on this, is we don't know who is staffing each agency right now. So there have been internal staffing changes. We don't have clear communication from everybody. So we can't say for certain that some of the updates we receive aren't pre-scheduled from before all of these changes started happening. So all of that to say, we are updating everything to match exactly what's on grants.gov, but we know there is likely internal chaos at each agency too, so things may change. That's what's going on within our database. I know a lot of you here at this webinar are Instrumentl users. We want to keep you in the loop on how we are updating everything so you are getting all of the information that we're getting from grants.gov. We are working very hard to make sure everything is super accurate there. Outside of the actual platform, another resource we have for you is a two-part federal grants workshop coming up in February. So Rachel Werner, who you heard from at the beginning of this event, will be back to share federal grant strategies given all the changes we've seen and will continue to see over the coming weeks. The first workshop is going to be about finding and evaluating federal grant opportunities in this new funding landscape. And the second one is about managing those grants and staying compliant, which is always critical with grants, but more so now that these agencies are likely going to be on very high alert regarding alignment and compliance. So I'm putting the link to register for those workshops in the chat box. It's in our event hub. You just open that link, and under upcoming events, you can scroll all the way to the right. These events are going to take place at the end of February and the start of March, just to make sure that things have settled down enough that we can provide some actual concrete guidance. We're going to know some next steps regarding federal funding by then, we hope. And finally, for those of you who aren't already Instrumentl users and you aren't already tapping into our extensive grant database, we're offering two things. First is that we have some very skilled grant specialists and onboarding advisors who work with thousands of nonprofits. So they know everything you're struggling with, where some untapped opportunities are, and what is a good use of time and resources for your stage of growth. We encourage you to hop on a quick call with them to explore how you can pivot or scale your grant strategy if that's something you're interested in doing. This is totally free. There are no strings attached. And once you do hop on a call with them, you can begin to explore our database. So we have 19,000 private, corporate, and association grants, as well as the 2,000 federal grants, which you may or may not want to explore at this point in time. But you will be intelligently matched by our algorithm to the most relevant, best fit grants to your needs. So you're only spending time exploring what's high value to you. You can get totally free 2 weeks. That's more than enough to explore what is out there. And again, this is free, no credit card required. So I'll put the link in the chat. If this is something that your organization could benefit from, I really encourage you to take advantage of that. And if you've already used Instrumentl and you've had a trial, but you're hoping to get back in there and find some more opportunities given everything going on right now, you can actually fill out this form and one of our onboarding strategists will reach out to you with next steps. So there's the two links I put in there that have to do with the Instrumentl platform, if that's something that might be helpful for you to explore at this point in time. And with that, the main thing I want you all to remember is you've got this. The work you do every day is so, so important. We are with you every step of the way in this crazy time, in calmer times. We are your support system, whether you use Instrumentl or not. Just please remember that we are a resource for you. You can come to our webinars, you can check out our blog, take advantage of the free trial to explore some new opportunities. Reach out if you have questions. My email address is right there. I know a lot of you asked questions in the Q&A and the chat, and I'm sorry we just didn't have enough time to cover everything. I know there's a lot that's unclear right now. We'll try our best to answer everything on LinkedIn and get those answers out to you folks. Like I said, you will receive the recording in your inbox shortly. There's going to be a recap of all of the key points discussed as well. I encourage you to connect with Rachel and Patrice. They're really the experts in this field. And with that, I hope you have a great weekend. And thanks again for taking time out of your Fridays to be here, folks. We will get through this, and hopefully Monday brings some good